We are now live, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Logan. Welcome to the San Ramon Valley Unified School District Board of Education workshop. We want to let the public know that we are video recording today's workshop. The recording is being live streamed on the district's YouTube channel, and a link to the recording has been posted to the district website. I'd like to introduce the board members today. Vice President Ken Mintz, if you would wave, Ken.
Hi, I'm here.
Our clerk, Rachel Hurd.
Hello.
Board member Shelley Clark.
Hello.
And Laura Bratt.
Hi.
Hi, and I'm your president, Susanna Ordway. Okay, right now, let's please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and
to the republic
to which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, may I have a motion to accept the agenda, today's agenda?
So moved.
Okay, second.
I second.
Okay, so like Ken has made, the motion was made by Ken and seconded by Laura, right? Laura. Okay, so I'm going to do a roll call. Board member Clark.
Aye.
Board member Bratt.
Aye.
Board member Hurd. I think you might be muted.
Aye. The
Oh,
space
okay.
bar was working. Aye.
Okay. Board member Mintz.
Aye.
And aye for me, so motion passes 5-0. Okay, so today workshop is actually on our strategic directions. So I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Malloy.
Thank you, President Ordway, and thank you all for being here. I think this is really an important discussion. We will hopefully facilitate and then turn it over to you, as this slide suggests, part one of a two-part workshop, the next one happening in a few weeks. So the next slide, please. So our purpose today is to share pertinent information with you, but most importantly, to solicit your input and guidance. It's so important that it's understood the strategic plan process, timeline, and stakeholder engagement processes, as well as to share some of the historical work that has happened in terms of equity in our system, because anything we do with strategic directions needs to be based on those historical commitments that have brought our district to good places that we will use to continue that work, as well as some new commitments that may need to emerge because they haven't been part of our work at all. We are focusing on the strategic process today and the equity pillar. The next meeting will focus on the deep learning and instruction pillar, as well as the well-being pillar, just so that we don't try to do too much in any one day. If we can turn to the next slide, you'll see that our agenda is to talk about the development of a plan, gain some feedback from you, speak about equity and its historical perspectives in our district. Again, we will ask for some feedback. Looking at student outcomes and impacts with feedback, and then implications for future work and very specific questions that, again, we will need your assistance on. So if I can turn to the next slide, let's jump right into the importance of a strategic plan. Why have one? And one of the things that I think we all agree is that when we look at the experience of our students and our families and our staff in our community, we gain rich insight into what they believe we are doing effectively and should continue, what might need some adjustments, and what might need some real change. And that I also believe that when we have a strategic plan, and again, down the road, we can call it what we want. For today's purpose, keep it at the generic term. It provides a clear sense to our community regarding what we're committed to, why we are committed to it, how we will achieve it, how we will learn together in order to close any gaps, and how we will monitor our improvements so that we can communicate effectively. It provides a rich foundation to the work that we're doing. Next slide. At the district level, strategic plans clarify direction, identify goals, develop strategies, devise the system of monitoring the learning, and it usually is a 3 to 5 year window, just so that we can push and try to do the work in a way that brings us to a very effective outcome on the other side. But I will say this, our work is continuous. Improvement is continuous. As we learn new things, we apply that learning to the next step, and it makes us stronger, which is why even if we might create a 3 to 5 year plan, I would hope that you would accept from me revisions on an annual basis, or even sooner, based upon new insights that emerge. One of the most important concepts that I espouse regarding leadership is you don't wait until your plan has reached a certain date to have it be informed by what is happening in our community. The other thing I'll offer for your consideration is that though we want to capture clear commitments that will move our district forward for our students, this is less about a wordsmithing exercise. And I think we've all been involved in wordsmithing exercises. I'm not being critical, but we could spend months planning. We could spend months thinking about the words that we use, and maybe all of us have had those experiences over time. My request of the board is that we do this work in a focused fashion over the next 3 to 4 months, so that we actually can land in a place that provides this clarity and then allows us to build some momentum over the summer as we plan for the fall. So the next slide, I think, is most important. Strategic planning is not about compliance. We all know how to check boxes. What true difference are we looking for? What outcomes are necessary? And how can we communicate this direction in a way that motivates us to do better, motivates us to build on history, motivates us to do what is the very best we can do and be for our students? So in terms of some of the requirements I've learned along the way, listening is so very important in terms of a strategic planning process. The collaboration of different perspectives and views is so necessary. Authentic assessment of situations is so key, but we have to keep in mind that my authentic assessment of something will be or could be very different than yours, which is why there needs to be healthy debate and dialogue, but there also needs to be two-way communication between our team and you, between our community and you and the cabinet, between our students and our staff, etc. This is so important that the strategic planning process be seen as an opportunity for rich dialogue, healthy debate, lots of good discussion, leading us to some really clear directions. Trust is needed. We're all here for students. Our intentions are positive, but our impact has to be clear. Courage. There may be some things we need to address that we will get into today relating to equity, for example, that might be uncomfortable, but it doesn't mean we can shy away from the important work. And a growth mindset speaks to the fact that we are all putting our most positive foot forward. We are assuming the best in terms of the work we're doing together. We are confident that we're all here for the right reasons and that we are committed to the work that is before us. So if we look at the next slide, the process is, it started with needs assessment and preliminary priorities, and that came forward to your last board report, where you approved the high-level pillars related to the foundation of equity on which we build our work in terms of instruction, learning, and well-being. We need input from you, both at this part of the process and later, so that we have a sense of where you'd like us to go, what information you'd like us to gain from our stakeholders. And then, of course, we need your decisions a little later in the process. We engage our stakeholders, bring back to you what we've heard from our stakeholders so we can begin the refining of priorities. And then, of course, June, we for your approval based upon what we've learned. It's also important to clarify that though each one of our 36 campuses is a unique community and that context is important, the district parameters provide a space for each community to do its improvement work and to create its goals, which honors that local context, but it's done in a systemic fashion. There are some systemic expectations that all will engage in. So this is the cycle as we are proposing it. And the advice I will offer you is that let's land at those key commitments. And then over the summer, we could work on how to capture those commitments in some type of graphic, which has historically been a vision, if you will, which has in the San Ramon Valley Unified School District has been called the framework of excellence. And we also can think about our mission statement. But I'm going to ask, or I'm going to propose, and this is totally up to you, that we do that after we engage in the stakeholder process, after we land on the commitments, because frankly, we can then decide how to capture that in a way that people can readily understand, readily remember, and readily communicate. And I find too often in my own experience, when we start at the very lofty mission and vision, we sometimes can lose the forest from the trees because we don't exactly know what we want to do and why. So I'm offering that as a proposal for your consideration. It may be different than what you've done in the past, but I do believe we need to get to that sense of capturing the commitments in an understandable way, naming this strategic direction, whatever it is we decide and you approve it should be, and certainly revisiting the language of the mission statement aligned with this. But I hope that the process, as I've explained it, is one that you can resonate with. Next slide. The system collaboratively creates and communicates the district plan. This is so important, I believe, so that the schools can do their work. I'm a firm believer that, and I hope you agree, that the focus of the district is to set direction, is to align resources, and is to monitor and support impact. But the work of change happens in classrooms and schools. All of our energy and all of our focus has to be in the classroom and in the school. It's not at the district level. Even though we play a very significant role in terms of work, everything we do, I believe, everything we say, all the support we provide has to be the direction towards the classroom and the school. And you as our board of trustees hold us as senior team accountable to the commitments we've made. But all the data we collect, all the evidence we provide isn't coming from district level. It's coming from the classrooms. It's coming from the schools. So as I've shared on the next slide, you have invited us to go deep with 3 pillars. We will focus more specifically on the equity pillar today. The next slide explains something that I'm going to formalize in the March 9th report, where we basically explain how we will engage our stakeholders in March and April into May. Surveys, thought exchanges, our principals are going to assist us with the coffee talks that are so effective that we've been using during our reopening period, town halls that you've seen before, student groups, and we want to ensure that all of our stakeholders are engaged. We can create the vehicle, but the insights you give us on this, at this workshop and at the next continuation workshop will inform the questions we ask. Because as I said earlier, it's so important that you think about how you want to drive this. So the next slide speaks to that timeline. March 2nd and March 11th, obviously the 2nd is today. The stakeholder engagement, we bring everything back to you in April, late April, probably early May, and we finalize in June. We have 2 meetings in June. So you can actually take a look at a first draft, send us back with your insights, and hopefully before the end of our meeting, hopefully there is a summer of some sort, we will have a plan for the fall. The next slide, I think, is the one that I really want to stress again, and we're going to stress it at the end. So we're not going to answer it now. This slide is going to come back at the end, because today we do want to hear your insights and perspectives on the topic, but really your voice and a leadership and perspective and approval comes a little later in the process, because what we really are hoping to learn from you is not so much what you want to see in the plan today, but what do you want to know more about from our community? You know our stakeholders, you know our constituents, you know our families, our staff, and of course our kids. What do you want to know more about, so that we devise a way to gain that insight and that perspective through the stakeholder engagement? So of course we want to hear some of your thoughts related to the insights and perspectives we're sharing today, but please know that we really need you to actually make those decisions in that May-June timeframe, more than we need you to make those decisions at this point in the process. But obviously, all of your opinions, perspectives, and reflections will help us engage the community effectively. So that first section was simply to outline the process for your consideration. You heard me speak about this at the board meeting. I wanted to start there again, but I want to stop just to be sure that there aren't any questions, concerns, or thoughts about the actual plan, because it's a little bit more detailed today than it was when you approved the direction. And the stakeholder process, as I said, will be in front of you on March 9th in the board meeting for your approval. This is just if you have any insights or thoughts on what you heard me share.
I have,
Okay, Laura. Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry. I have just a couple of thoughts. I wanted to make sure, and I know that you guys are all, you have this on your radar as well, but that we really have meaningful engagement. And that we, you know, when I saw the list of, like, with the thought exchange and the principal panels and student groups and that kind of thing, I felt like we were missing the internal stakeholders as well. So having engagement, meaningful engagement with staff, meaningful engagement with the actual principals, not just them seeking information, you know, outside of them. And then from a student standpoint as well, really making sure that we're looking beyond the expected student groups. You know, I think that oftentimes the softest voices, I guess, that are the ones that are silenced. And when we're talking about equity, when we're talking about inclusion, we really need to create a bridge for those voices to be heard. And so making a point of being really strategic in how we are engaging everyone, so that there's those opportunities for everyone to step into the center and speak and talk about their experience. And then also making sure that, and you touched on this at the beginning, that this isn't just performative, that we really have strategy and accountability around all parts of the path. So from that beginning engagement, through to making the decisions, through to the implementation, having a plan that kind of builds all the way through and benchmarks and accountability built in, so that we can, when we get to the other side of the 5 years, that we can look back and see we accomplished this, as opposed to we hoped and then we ran into this and we ran into that and we got stuck. So kind of building out that as you're building the plan. Those are my two initial thoughts with that.
Yeah, thanks, Trustee Bratt. And just so I want to confirm that staff are very significantly a part of this, their own views, and your thought around how do we ensure we receive and hear all voices. A strategy I've used historically, and I wrote a note for myself, is sometimes we ask those who have a certain trust in communities that may not always wish to share their voice to actually help us facilitate some of those conversations. So it doesn't always need to be facilitated by us. If in some cases there's someone else who could facilitate that might have already existing relationships that might help us get at the insights that we don't always hear. So thank you for that, especially with students who don't put their hands up. Others, before we move into the next section.
Ken?
Yes. So can you see me, Susanna? I can only see the PowerPoint and whoever's speaking.
Yeah, well, I can see it on the gallery view, so a few.
Oh, okay.
I don't see everybody, but I do. You're happening to be right on my screen right now, so I saw you raising your hand.
Okay, very good. Dr. Malloy, I appreciate the direction. The question that I have, without diving too deeply into the next level of detail from the circle that you put up about, the process. As we move from a district plan to site strategies, I think it's going to be really important, kind of like you were starting with, not having a mission statement vision that we don't go much further, we spend more time planning than executing. The issue of centralized versus decentralized strategies and tactics, and making sure that having strategies in place don't stop us from actually getting work done, if you understand what I'm saying. The issue of it's not quite a handoff from the district strategy session once it's been accomplished to the sites to now go and do your thing. It's really a combination, because some things based upon structure are held by the district office and other things are turned over to the sites for their execution. And I find that many times that becomes part of the disconnect. As a board, we see that we've set the policy, we've set the direction, but then we don't always necessarily see the implementation the way that we were anticipating. And making sure that as we move through the process, not right now, but as we move through the process, we take those things into account in terms of what that handoff looks like, and making it clear to folks, where the, again, centralized versus decentralized decision process fits into all of this.
Thank you for that, Trustee Mintz. A little known fact, because it was a few years ago, I just want to offer, not because I'm referencing a book that I wrote about 3 years ago called The Intelligent Response System. I'm only going to refer to it because it captures what you just said. There has to be a significant relationship between district and school, and there needs to be process and accountabilities in the best sense of that term that holds us together. How something is implemented can be very different depending upon the context of that community, but the what that we're committed to is a non-negotiable. And how our district team supports school-based leaders in terms of gathering that evidence. And then we bring it back to you. We bring the evidence back to you for the oversight, even though there's going to be 36 variations on the theme. My commitment is that then you ask for the evidence that we're actually moving those pieces forward. The only challenge is if we actually ask too much. Now, we want to have courageous goals, but we also have to have them limited in number so that there can actually be success. Because the other thing around human nature, which I'm sure you've all learned, is too many goals means, and there's actually research on this, very little is done. Where clear and committed and courageous goals, fewer in number, happens, then we can be successful and be effective. Thank you for that comment.
Yeah, no, and let me just back what you just set up with what I find is when you give staff members, for instance, multiple priorities, and you say that they're all top priorities, there are no top priorities. And what ends up happening is the authorization and what actually gets done shifts to the lowest possible level. Sometimes that's good, but sometimes it's not. If in fact there were priorities that you had in mind at our level, for instance, but someone at a lower level in the organization, and I'm talking hierarchically, of course, they then choose what they find to be the most important. And so I wouldn't want us to miss out on, for instance, as we're about to talk about, equity initiatives, because we haven't made clear the priority that we place on that for others to follow. Thank you.
Anyone else? trying to make sure I see if there's someone who wants to speak. Okay.
Okay, I think we can continue. Thank you for those insights. Please know that we're taking lots of notes. We have lots of people helping us today so that we capture all your reflections so that it informs our work. So in the board meeting, when you gave direction for us to proceed in this way, I was clear with you that I was proposing equity as our foundation that we use for the work in terms of learning, the work in terms of well-being. And that is because it is our responsibility, I believe, as a school district to meet the needs of every one of our students. And I trust that you resonate with this statement. It's also important to note when I make this statement that we don't always succeed. And when we aren't successful in meeting the needs of every one of our students, we have to look at that and look at our students both at a personal level, what's happening in the classroom between that student and his or her peers or their peers, or with the teacher. We have to look at school level. Might there be some structures and processes and cultures in a particular school where someone's voice can't be heard, someone's identities or identity is not understood, and might there need to be change at that level? Or might there be some systemic realities that need to be considered, shifted, and changed? But we're starting from the commitment that every one of our students must be successful because of the service and the support that we provide and the conditions that we create. And when that's not the case, we take responsibility as the educators, as the trustees, as the adults to figure out what it is that we need to do. The next slide is just a graphic of when we use the term equity. There are many different definitions that people may hold. There are maybe different reactions that people may have. There are concerns sometimes about some of these topics, and maybe even some fears regarding why it is that we're actually addressing them. But if we go back to our guiding principle that we must serve all students, I hope that that is our driver as we think about creating the kind of school communities that all of our kids need, which obviously the diversity of our students means different things, the conditions within our communities that are inclusive, the knowledge of the individuals in our communities so that our efforts are personal, and that we're not afraid to challenge ourselves individually, even if it's uncomfortable, to challenge ourselves collectively if culture needs to shift in a particular community, or even challenge ourselves systemically when there might be some ways of doing things that simply, when we look deeply, don't always provide the conditions that I'm speaking about. There's another challenge with the work that we're doing that I want to be absolutely clear about. We know that language matters. And we know that there are challenges when we are trying to choose language to be as inclusive as possible. And we know, depending upon our experiences, we may not always know how to communicate certain ideas and experiences, identities and reflections. We may not always understand how others respond and react. And we're going to do our very best, not just through this planning process, but beyond, to create the conditions where people can put their truth on the table and that we can respond. I'm going to give you an example that's part of this presentation, and one that our cabinet struggled with just today. So you're going to see the term when we talk about the demographics of our community, you're going to hear the term Latinx. Some people have asked us to use that term because it's also gender neutral. Some don't like that term and would prefer Latina, Latino. Some prefer Hispanic. Others who have been challenged by that term might make connections to colonial structures. I'm only giving you this example because we struggled on our own cabinet because we knew that no word was actually as inclusive as we'd want it to be. And we are putting out there right now that it could cause a reaction. But part of what we're going to hopefully do through this process is leave space for people to share what they're uncomfortable about so we can grow in our understanding, grow in our trust, and grow in our wisdom. That's the kind of process we are proposing. But I'm using that very concrete example because there will be times when you maybe today, or our community maybe, sees or hears something that doesn't resonate. And that perspective is a valid one to hear. But I'm just putting out there that it should, I hope, not stop us moving forward in this important work. Next slide. Equity, as I said, is describing a lot of things, but equity is not some things. Equity is not equal, okay? Not equal because it's speaking about access, opportunity, and outcomes. And though we truly believe that we go back to that original slide, that all of our students deserve the conditions that will allow them to be successful and safe and healthy and amazing learners in our system, there may be some who are experiencing us very differently. So equity is not equal. Equity is not ignoring differences, and I have to put that out there. Sometimes people say, well, we're all human beings. I don't see color, for example. But the truth is, this work is not about ignoring the fact that there's a diversity to all of us, and that honoring the identities that we bring into the community is important, and that the conditions respect and celebrate, because we are different, and there is absolutely nothing to ignore there. As I said previously, it's not just about opportunity and access, it's about outcomes. And we have data to share about that. And equity is not a goal in a sense, it's a way of being, it's a way of acknowledging, it's the way of affirming, being aware of, interrupting where necessarily, naming where things might need to be different, done so in a way that brings about that healthy change that we know is needed. And as I said previously, it may mean that there is some discomfort, but that there is a goal that never lose sight of our students, our staff, and our community. Next slide. So it is a commitment to action. It's not just a discussion. It is the process of providing access and opportunity to underserved populations in order to be fair and just and to provide these outcomes. And as I just said, it's a way of being. Free from bias and discrimination is what we strive for, but as human beings, please know I'm just trying to be as candid as I can when I say we all have bias based upon who we are, where we've been, the experiences we have, and the cultures that have formed us. But the important part of this process is that we're willing to name some of those things, especially when they may have impact on others. And you're going to hear later how we talk about, it's not just about intent. I didn't intend for that to happen. It's about the impact that someone may have experienced us in a certain way. So I'm hoping you're getting a sense kind of at the high level of how we're kind of proceeding in terms of this work. And if I could turn to the next slide, I have always used the term underserved as opposed to at risk for a very specific reason. When we use the term vulnerable or at risk, and I understand that that's a valid term, the onus is on the student somehow. The adjective is about the student. When I use the term underserved, it's intentional because it's about the service we're providing, as professionals, the educators, the adults. And when we're not able to do so in a way that makes the kind of difference that's required, we take on that responsibility to do something differently. So it's about equitable resources and supports. It's about removing barriers and obstacles. It's about looking closely at outcomes and not shying away from all the reasons that those outcomes might be impacted. And when I say outcomes, academic outcomes are absolutely important, but we all know they are not the only outcomes we're talking about. The outcomes that speak to well-being are also key. The outcomes that speak to that sense of self that our students need to have when they leave our district and move out into the world in whichever path they choose. It's about how they're able to be who they are in relationship to others and in the community, so that all of our students can transform their communities, their cities, their nation, the world. I truly believe that when we create the right conditions, we can do all kinds of great things for our kids. If I can turn to the next slide, this is, I think, really significant data for us to consider, because our demographics over the last 20 years have changed significantly. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I believe this data, at least from the perspective of our demographic data, you can see, for instance, white students, 80% 20 years ago, 38% now, and so forth. And though we're providing this important data regarding the diversity of our community, we also need to know that there are other diversities as well that we pay attention to: gender, orientation, learning needs, for example, special education. And so I think it's important that while we are approaching this important work of equity, we're speaking about all of the diversities, and we're speaking about any concerns around barriers and discrimination, even though we know that as we are having this discussion, depending upon who we're engaging, they're going to come to this discussion based upon their identity and their experience, and something that I think we need to pay attention to. And once again, if you turn to the next slide, another way of depicting the same information using race as an example, the increase of people of color in our district over 20 years, you can see there. So we are a community that needs to be responsive to this, and we need to be sure we're doing it in a way that's allowing us to be better, effective, and of service to all kids. And I'm almost finished with my part, because when we look at that diversity that I referred to, you can see all the different diversities, and there are other variations on this theme that we wish to pay attention to. So my hope in terms of this higher level portion, this kind of 30,000 feet section, before I turn this over to the members of the team, are just to give you a sense of what we're referring to. And I hope, and we're going to hear from you, how does this resonate with you? What is it that we need to think about? What concerns and questions might you have? But I'm going to ask if we can have that particular discussion with you after Debbie and John and others offer a few more perspectives on this next section called the historical perspectives of our work in equity. But you know what, Debbie, I think I've changed my mind. Before we go there, because we're going to go right into the specifics, let me stop there. I'm going to change my strategy. Maybe you have some thoughts and reflections about what you've just heard me say at the kind of, systemic vision level regarding how we're defining things and how we're proceeding. So let me stop there before we move on, because I think you might have some insights to offer.
Okay, any board members? I mean, for myself, yeah, I mean that right, the changing of our demographics says quite a bit. The last 10 years or whatever, and we do need to, as a school district, who I think want to continue to serve all students and serve them the best way possible. We need to include that into our our strategy moving forward. Okay, any other board member, your reflections? Rachel?
John, I really appreciate how inclusive you presented the term equity and all the different layers to it. When we first started the conversation and we were using the word pillar, Ken's going to laugh at me because he's the only trustee that was there when we did the other strategic planning process. But when I got really fixated on the term pillar and how the columns seem so separate. But as you went through this, I really started to view what you were referring to as pillars as almost like lenses, and that there would be an equity lens, there would be an academic lens, and there would be a well-being or social emotional lens. And that helped. And I really took to heart the things you said in the beginning about let's not get too fixated on the graphic or how we're going to package it. But I really feel like the inclusiveness of all of this is the right direction, and the honesty in which you portrayed that we all have to learn how to use the words around this, and that everybody reacts to different words differently, and that a healthy part of this process will be exploring that.
And Trustee Hearn, thank you for emphasizing something that I didn't, which is, and maybe the term pillar, to your point, when we get into it, is the wrong term because these are all interrelated. So it's more about what do we believe our students should be experiencing to what end? And then how are we going to focus on these areas that are very connected and foundational? Thank you for naming that. And I think as we go forward, that's why I thought after we kind of land on what our commitments need to be, we can then figure out how to capture it in a way that resonates, because we've actually done the heavy lifting regarding what we hope to accomplish.
Because you have to divide up what you're going to talk about in some kind of categories, because you can't, it's hard to talk about it all at the same time. So, I mean, thank you, I get it.
Ken?
Yeah, if I can.
Yeah.
Suzanne?
Yeah, Ken, go ahead.
Yes, I appreciate what Rachel was just saying. You know, when we talk about pillars, I also think in terms of silos, that really does make that separation, visually too much. And we really do need to continue to look at that interrelationship. One of the things that occurred to me as you're talking, John, was, how we've looked at the issue of equity over time, because we really haven't. We've looked at parts of it. I think back to language we've used over and over and still do, like achievement gap, and trying to fix the achievement gap, which speaks really just to the outcome section of it. It doesn't really speak to, the other aspects of equity. A few years ago, one of our focus areas from our superintendent really focused on, it didn't matter who you were. We focused, again, outcome-based on the bottom 20%, whoever those 20% were. And we weren't making any differentiation between who made up that. But if you were in the bottom 20%, that was our focus point. Most recently, we've added safety and wellness into our conversation, and then expanded the term of equity to include all of these different groups and subgroups. And I think it's important that we move in this direction. I'm saying this all for anyone who might be listening to be able to demonstrate that this isn't just a paper activity, that it is an evolution in how we work with our students to prepare them for success in school and success in life. And part of that is to understand the evolution of our society as well, and particularly our own community and how that's changed. And that does get into the demographics that we've been talking about. So anyway, I thought I'd just bring that part up.
And thank you, because one of the things we won't speak about today, but will be part of our discussions with you later, is in order for us to really focus where we need, part of this process is each school will look at who they are not serving based upon some district criteria, and then think about their practices in that community, their culture in that school, any obstacles and barriers that might exist there. And then to your point, it raises the district in terms of improvement up when we're focusing in that granular fashion at the classroom and the school level. So more to come later, but you're absolutely right. There's got to be a starting point, or this just becomes a theoretical exercise. And the starting point are students in classrooms that for a variety of reasons, we are not able to provide service. And even when we share it with you district data, that's just to provide some impetus for why we believe this work is important. It's not the focus. The focus is what's happening in classrooms and schools. This data just is why we have to focus in some areas, but we can't stay there or it's philosophical. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah. Just one other thought on that. When you spoke about equity not being equal, I think it's going to be important for us to keep in mind also whoever our students are, the ones who are more advanced, who we want to make sure we're not going to be holding them back from achieving their capabilities as well. So we want to make sure that we don't have students in class who are so bored because the information we're trying to provide to them isn't really what they need. There's more to it that they can advance much faster too. And so that's another subset of our own students. And with that, we don't want to forget about all the kids in the middle, the ones that maybe don't fit into any subcategory, but we just want to make sure all boats rise.
And that's why that slide that we started this conversation was all students. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Laura?
Thanks. To the point of at times some of us might get uncomfortable. There might be some fear around equity discussion, around all of these pillars and inclusion and that thread of inclusion throughout. I think that we have, and I've said this before, and I'm going to continue to say it, we're an educational institution and we have an opportunity to educate our community and to give everyone the power to have the safe space to be able to be brave and to make mistakes, as well as to have the ability to learn more, right? It's like, when you know more, you do better, right? That idea. And so I would like to look at this strategic process and the plan and then the implementation with that umbrella idea of let's use what we know how to do to be able to move our community forward with these pillars, so that we're doing what we need to do for our students, but it transcends that, and we're building a community and a future for our entire community to be able to look at specifically equity, to look at inclusion, to look at learning, to look at all of these pillars and all of this stuff we're going to talk about in a way that is about learning and not about fear and defensiveness and being afraid to be uncomfortable. It's about feeling empowered when you're uncomfortable, because that means that you're learning and you're growing. So just that kind of philosophical kind of thread throughout, I just wanted to throw out there.
Thanks.
Anyone? Any other reflections? Bird? Okay, I think we can move on.
Debbie, I think this is over to you now, or is it John?
No, I apologize. It's to me, but I know when we're talking, we want to be able to see each other's faces. So kind of have to go back and forth a little bit here. So thank you, Dr. Malloy, for kicking us off. And thank you, Board of Education, for having us here today. We're really turning now to really examine a historical perspective of SRVUSD equity work, really over the last decade. And I say that I focus on the word A or N, historical perspective, because it's not the, with a capital T, historical perspective. Okay. And I really want to emphasize that. So what we did as an ed services team, and many of us have been around for at least 10 years now, we really reflected on the experiences with the work that we've engaged in with regard to equity. And then we've also reached out to others who have led the work over time so that we can get multiple different perspectives to incorporate into this presentation. And we thought it was really important to provide the board with this perspective, in part because we wanted to highlight that, of course, we're not starting this work from scratch, right? That we need to acknowledge the work that has been done in the past and really to reflect on it and understand that that is the foundation for the work going forward. So much of the equity work done over the last decade in SRVUSD has focused on really several different things, and one of which is this idea of culturally responsive teaching and learning. And when we talked to people about this presentation, what we kind of discovered was that when Dr. Shiraki Holly came here to speak in 2013, it was really a watershed moment for our district and something that people who were here really still talk about. And so it was a bit controversial at the time, if you recall, or if you were a part of that, but he really challenged us to think differently about how we teach all kids. And it really altered our thinking as to what we've been doing in the past, and really caused kind of an examination of whether or not what we have done in the past has been working for students. So he focused on this idea that being culturally responsive is so important, and that we need to validate, affirm, and build a bridge between home cultures and languages in the classroom. So why do we have to do that? Because I think we all understand that the cultures that all of us bring into the classroom, that impacts the ways in which we learn and interact with others. And so this was really key to our work. We did a lot on cultural competence. So in order to be able to teach in a culturally responsive way, we had to support all of our staff, district administrators, site administrators, classified certificated staff, and really better understanding the different cultures that we'll bring into the classroom, and really acknowledge that that is an important part of the learning process. So with this work, each school had a teacher liaison, and they were kind of part of a larger district group who met on a regular basis. And they would meet, talk, and then they would bring that information back to their school. And so what that looked like kind of depended on the school and the school context and the needs. But oftentimes there were, all school book studies. They did sometimes brought some people in from Dr. Holly's organization to do classroom observations and really better understand what is culturally responsive teaching and what is not culturally responsive teaching. Something else that has been a big part of our work over the last several years is this idea of courageous conversations. And so we brought in a group called the Pacific Action Group, which many of our trainings were led by Dr. Lori Watson. And what we really wanted to do here were to develop and nurture the abilities of staff to lead discussions regarding race. Because what we were hearing, what we were experiencing, not surprisingly, was that people are kind of avoiding this topic because they don't want to either say the wrong thing or they don't want to insult someone. So we just weren't talking about it. And so we had a group of individuals. So this was not staff wide, not district wide like Shiraki Holly's professional development, but we did grow kind of a cadre of administrators, certificated staff, of classified staff, who were able to really go back to their sites in their contexts and lead conversations where individuals were able to stay engaged. They were able to experience some discomfort, right? These conversations are often not comfortable, where individuals were able to speak their truth, how they really felt and what they were thinking. And then finally, to expect and accept closure. And so that is, of course, very hard for many of us. But we spent at least 2 years working with that Pacific Action Group in bringing in trainers, and it's really built capacity across states. We really have a strong group of leaders in this area. And then moving on to our LGBTQ plus community and the work we've done in that area. As you all know, we have our Gay Straight Alliance Clubs, or our GSAs, at all of our high schools and now all middle schools, and that we're even branching out into our elementary sites with this idea of having PRISM clubs. We have gender neutral bathrooms and facilities at all of our high schools. And then, of course, the GSA student and board forums have really been an integral part of how we really better understand the needs of our LGBTQ plus community. And so those have been really wonderful. And then finally, the California Fair Act, and then the Healthy Youth Act. And we still have some work to do in this area, but those, of course, were passed by our legislation and really kind of guide us / mandate specific things that we need to be integrating into the curriculum with regard to LGBTQ plus. And then finally, for special education, over the last decade, and there's a lot more than what's represented on this slide, but we've had things like Ability Awareness Weeks, really a focus on inclusive practices. So really digging down and looking at everything that happens in a school. And it's not just academics, right? It's lunchtime, it's that field trip that kids go on, and making sure that all students were able to access those opportunities, and that we as a school would intervene in order to support sites in providing all those opportunities for the students so they could participate like any other student. Another piece of this important work was really shifting mindset to raise expectations that our special education students absolutely can succeed in school. They might need different types of supports or accommodations, but they absolutely can succeed. And it's this idea that we talked a lot about over the last several years of a fixed mindset versus that growth mindset. And then finally, there was an elimination of the mild SDC class, additional kindergarten program, just over, I believe, the last couple of years. And then this is kind of a broader overview of the work that we have done. And when we reflect on it, I feel like there's been a lot of emphasis put on this idea of building leadership capacity across the system. So some of the things you heard about in terms of the courageous conversations and really building that cadre of teachers who go on and carry that work forward. But we've also done a lot of other things. And so we have several different equity committees, including we had an equity leadership team that was heavily involved in a lot of this work. We had district teachers on special assignments who have focused specifically on equity. And they've really, really, really did a great job at supporting sites and individual teachers who may be struggling with really understanding what this looks like in the classroom specifically. And then we added our amazing Ashley as equity coordinator this year. And then a lot of schools are doing a lot of other things kind of on their own, initiatives that they have been working on, such as clubs, partnerships with parent and community organizations. I mentioned earlier the GSA Student and Board Forum. So there's been a lot of work overall done in this area in terms of really building leadership capacity across the system. And so where does that lead us? So when we really look back at the equity work over the last 10 years, we have focused a lot on the individual within the system. So we focused on developing and nurturing their knowledge, their beliefs, and their actions, right? So when we think about having a book club, or we think about bringing in trainers to support individual teachers and understanding how to teach in more culturally responsive ways. So we've done a lot of work that is focused on the individuals. And I see when we, throughout this presentation, that has been some amazing work, but what is really our next step in this journey? And that's really what we're here for today. So I did want to stop, if you feel this is a good time to stop and really kind of get your perspectives, because I know a lot of you were really instrumental and very involved in the equity work in the district over the last, 5, 10, 15, maybe 20 years. And so we would love to get your perspective on that, but also what that perspective, what impact that may have on the work that we're going to engage in going forward. So I feel like this might be a good stopping point.
Anyone have any comments or questions? Shelley?
Yeah, so thank you, Deb. That was a great recap of what's been done. I was on the Cultural Responsiveness Committee in 2018, and we met several times and talked about different issues and went through several exercises, and I thought it was a really great start. I think obviously the world has changed so much, and we're in a different place now. And I appreciate what has been done before. But when you talk about what was done before and the equity, the teachers on special assignment and the equity club, the focus of that, is that the same definition as we're looking at today when we talk about equity? Because I feel like some of the areas were maybe missed, and I'm just in comparing where we've been and where we're wanting to go. Are those definitions the same? Was the focus the same?
Well, and so I'll let Ashley Gutierrez, our equity coordinator, is on this call. And so from my perspective, we had a lot of different groups going. And one of the purposes of the strategic plan is to really hone in on what we are trying to do with our equity work, and then look at what already exists, what fits into that work, and what might not fit into that work that either needs to be changed or, folded into something else. I'm not sure that answers your question, Shelley, but I think what happens when we have less of a systemic approach and more of an individual approach, then things start to happen organically. And so, let's form a committee on this and let's form a committee on that, which is so wonderful, because I truly, more than any other district I've ever been in by far, we have teacher leaders at every site, K-12. But at the same time, how are we really focusing our work on certain items, strategies, goals that we feel will lead to really powerful outcomes for our students?
And Debbie, if I can just add a comment before Ashley jumps in. The other, I think, makes things different and aligns with what Debbie said, that when we're doing our equity work, we're looking at the systemic levels, the communal or cultural in a school level and at the individual level. This can't just be about who happens to be in a school with some teacher leaders who influence some work, and in that particular space there's a club, in that particular space there is an initiative that allows those kids to actually get a certain experience or service. It's more about how are we looking at all three: system, community, individual, interrelated at all times. How are we defining what we're talking about, as we tried to do at the beginning of this discussion, so that there is some clarity to the direction. And then I think this is the most important part from my seat anyway. And some members of our community have shared this with me personally. It's absolutely necessary to provide the learning that allows all of us to be better. It's also important that we're accountable so that the change happens, because sometimes the learning alone doesn't necessarily bring about the impact outcome piece. It may bring about the awareness piece. And so when you talk about did some of the initiatives that I've gotten to learn about, and I'm thrilled to hear happen here, that are led by great leaders, staff leaders, are they wonderful? Yes. Have they brought about impact? Yes. But have we seen that systemically in all places, classrooms and schools? No. So that's just my seat, my perspective from this seat. Ashley, if there's anything in response to that important question that you'd like to add.
That was all. I think my focus is really just identifying the practitioners who are doing amazing work in their individual locations and providing the space for them to come together and share their resources. So as both Deb and Dr. Malloy mentioned, that we have this really kind of united looking at all of the levels from systemic all the way to the personal level.
That's why I'm so excited about doing this kind of work, because I felt like when I was on the Cultural Responsiveness Committee before, there was a lot of good conversation, and I know some good things came out of it, but I don't feel like there was enough teeth in it. And I think what I'm seeing today, which is so wonderful, is that this is not just a plan to get ready. It's actually a plan that's going to take us to a place where we can create action that will have a direct impact on our community and on our students. And we have a great opportunity to educate our community at this point. And I think this is right on time. This is what's needed now, and I'm excited to move forward with it. So thank you.
Ken? Oh, you're muted, Ken.
Thank you. I keep messing that up. The one aspect when we look at historical basis of what we've accomplished and the things that we've put in place, the one piece that may be missing in that is what have been the problems that we're trying to solve? Where do we see the gaps from what we've done and what we're trying to get to? I just want to make sure that we're not, and I'm not suggesting we are, but I think there's more that needs to be done as we approach community engagement and more voices into the conversation, that we're not just trying to find some level of perfection when it comes to equity, but we're really trying to dig into what are the issues that we have that we're trying to resolve? What problems have we identified that say we haven't done enough, even with good programs? Because I think that's one of the questions that's going to come up for part of our community is why are we even doing this if we don't know what the problem is we're trying to solve? And not in a global, worldwide basis, but here, this particular community. And I think that gets into the brave and courageous conversations that we need to have for people who may not recognize the issues that we have, even with the programs that we've put in place.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to jump right in, and then, sorry, Rachel, only because I just wanted to kind of jump in on the same thing Ken is saying, that, yeah, I mean, as far as I understand, there's a lot of stuff, great stuff going on with, different school sites. But yes, it's not throughout. And I've heard that, for certain people or, staff, families, whoever, students, that only those who are ready for this work, really receive, the learning and things like that, and others don't. So how, as we move forward to kind of encourage this acceptance of this learning, right? Or to be brave enough to kind of put out there that, yeah, I disagree type thing. So.
And thank you for that, Trustee Ordway. I think the other piece that I'm appreciating about this discussion is I know we're spending a lot of time speaking about, and it's right that we're spending a lot of time speaking about the conditions that all kids need to succeed so that we reach every student. There's also another component that I hope we agree, and this is where it connects again to what we'll talk about in the next session, which is more about what is the purpose of learning. And it's about what we gain individually, but it's also about what we're able to contribute, how we change our world, how we change our the structures that need to be changed, how we transform. And do we believe our kids can do that? I certainly do. And are we providing them the opportunities to do that? And it's not just when they're with us, but beyond. And so, you know, people say, well, why are you doing this? If I go back to Trustee Mintz's question, it is about the problem to be solved. Number one is, well, not all of our kids are succeeding. And what are we going to do about it? How are we going to change those conditions? And how are we going to be really specific about that? And then what does our community need? And how you define community more broadly, as I said, right up to the world. Like, if our kids are not going to be the transformers, then we're going to have a problem. Some challenges that we already know about. And so we're going to need them. And what we do in our schools makes a big difference. So it's not just about the individual student, though that's important, but it's also about what they then can do collectively beyond us. And I hope that we get into that a bit more in the learning and the instruction side of things, but I wanted to name it here as well, because Trustee Ordway, your comment and Trustee Mintz's comment were making me start to think about that piece, which I don't think we've had the chance to emphasize yet.
Thank you. And Rachel, did you have something?
Yeah, I think kind of building on what everybody said, part of this is how you go from the authentic engagement with the folks who are most passionate about it, right? Whether the gender equity work or the LGBTQ work or the culturally responsive work or longtime special needs work is what really made you passionate about equity. And that drives you, and that then you have to scale it, and you have to scale it so that it's all of the components of it, not just the one particular area that an individual brings their passion to. But you can't lose that passion, because I think that's what also keeps people committed to it too. So it's the same as the loose tight thing with the district level and the site level, but it's another layer on just the individual perspectives that we bring to it. We touched on this when we were in our board workshop with the GSA students, that we have to take their issue, but we also have to expand it. And because it was a very eye-opening visiting with Black Student Union students last year, because here I had all this history of the district climate committee, and all this knowledge of the things Deb talked about, of all this great stuff that we'd done. But these kids really pointed out some really important pieces that weren't there yet, right? And it just shows it's never ending, but we have to include all the opinions, because we need to be working on all the pieces of it and not just saying, oh, but we did this and we did this. And I know we're not saying that. The history is really important to recognize, but it's a big issue, and we've done some good work there, but we now need to scale it.
If I can add just one more quick comment, and Laura, if you don't mind, based upon that, I think it's important that we recognize that we do have a responsibility to educate the community, because there will be community members who will ask and wonder why we're talking about these type of things, and why aren't we just focusing on reading, writing, and arithmetic? And we need to be able to clearly communicate how this all fits together, how success for every student fits in with the academic portion as well, getting back to pillars and the interchangeability of those pillars. Thank you.
Laura?
Yeah, and I think just quickly with Ken, I think part of that is initially when we were talking about lenses rather than pillars, really looking at how equity, transcends into learning and education, and how it, when we provide equity for everyone, we're rising everyone up. We're not bringing anyone down. We're making a richer educational environment, as opposed to stripping away the educational environment. And I think if we can tell that story of equity and systemic inclusion and all of the things that we're discussing in a way that really helps people to understand the value, rather than to create fear and defensiveness around it. And so I think that's, a charge that we have in this process. then I just back to the historical, equity initiatives that we've done. My family's been very fortunate to have had very strong support, and then also to have some marginalization experience and seeing where the ceiling is when it comes to getting into the systemic portion of it, and how there is potential for there to not be that safety net from a systemic standpoint. And I guess I look at public schools as, whether, I don't know if this is politically correct, but it's a safety net. From my perspective, it should be a safety net. It should be a way for every single student should be able to have a place to land in the public school system. And that requires systemic framework as opposed to individual framework. I think that what we see when we look historically is we see this wonderful, amazing work that's very passion driven and very important. But we're, and I don't want to say but, because I think and sometimes with that we lose sight of those, again, that are silenced, those that aren't empowered to speak up. And so it becomes this imbalance, and then that no longer is equitable, right? So how do we take the power and the knowledge and the base that we have with the great work that we've done and lift it up to build a framework that then allows that structure for everyone to kind of feel, whether they're empowered to speak or not, there's a net for them to pick them up, right? There's multiple touch points, there's multiple opportunities. It's not just that disempowered student, marginalized student having to find the place to raise the voice. The place is there where they are. The place isn't where they have to go, if that makes sense. And so it's that I guess argument for really looking at it systemically and then building down from there, rather than kind of corning it up and then, so.
Right. Laura, anyone else? Any more reflections or questions or? Okay, we can move on.
Okay. Okay, so thank you so much for that discussion. That was really, really helpful. So moving on. So I think that some of what you highlighted and talked about are really going to be encompassed in this next section. And so one of the things I think we really need to think about and keep coming back to is that idea of what equity is and what it is not. And so I know for a long time, I've heard people talk about equity in terms of opportunities and access. And we all know that providing opportunities and access for all of our students is really, really important. But the next step that we feel we really have to take is to really focus on the outcomes, whether we're talking about academic or social emotional or mental health. And so in this next section of the presentation, we're going to dig a little bit into the data. And so first we will be looking at some academic indicators of success. So we will look at graduation rates, standardized test scores, and then college and career readiness scores per the California dashboard. We will then look at some suspension data and how that differs our underserved groups. And then again, I just want to reiterate that for the social emotional piece, we do feel like the quantitative data, things from like Healthy Kids, is really, really important. But we also, for this presentation, really felt it was important, after all the numbers and the data, to share our students' voices. And I feel as a district, we've done a really good job over the last several years of really setting up either formal or informal ways to hear from students, all students, including our underserved students, about what's working for them at school and really what's not working for them at school. And so the data that we are going to look at really focuses on different subgroups. And that's for a lot of different reasons, partly because we don't have quantitative data on CAS, for example, for our LGBTQ plus community, right? So we have other forms of data that can inform next steps, but we don't have all data on all subgroups. And so we kind of really kind of wanted to provide a snapshot and kind of a broader representation of where we think our students are with regard to academics, especially, and social emotional. So before digging too much into the data, we wanted to really focus on this idea of intention versus impact. And we've already talked about it a little bit in this presentation, but I think it can apply to many different sections. And so we believe that the majority of individuals in this organization, whether it's our students, our staff, our administrators, our community members, our parents, absolutely have good intentions. There's good intent behind their behavior. And this is especially, I think this is especially true in education, right? People do not set out to be harmful. They do not go into this profession in order to do harm to students. But we really need, again, to shift this focus away from what was the intention of that action to what was the impact of that action on the students or the student body, so that we can really, really better understand how these actions are impacting all of our students, and especially our underserved students. So here's a slide, and I know a lot of data. Hopefully you can kind of get the gist of this. This is SRVUSD's graduation rate over 3 years. So 2017, 2018, 2019. For the purposes of this discussion, we really tried to leave a lot of the 2020 data out because, you know, we weren't really sure if it was representative. So we focused on these 3 years and we looked at graduation rates. And I think that everyone on this call understands that our graduation rates are extremely high. They way exceed the county and the state, and we understand that. They're about, you know, they hover at about 97%. But what this graph really represents is that though our students' graduation rates are high, it's not the same for everybody, and that there are definite disparities in this data. And so that you can see on the left, you know, the Asian population or white population, Latinx, two or more races, are holding steady to a certain extent. They dipped a little bit in 2009, which needs to be examined. But if you look specifically at 2019, 93% of our Black students graduated high school, and only 87% of our students with disabilities graduated on time. So again, though this is probably better than a lot of the districts, even in the surrounding area, we feel that this is unacceptable, and that this obviously really illuminates a gap in our system that we need to fix. And this slide represents our CAS, or standardized test scores, in English language arts. And this graph is the percentage of students who were proficient over the last 5 years. So 2015 to 2019. And again, just looking at the graph, you can see the disparities, especially with regard to our Black students, economically disadvantaged, our students with disabilities, and English learners. Again, if we're just looking at trends over this data, we can definitely see that there has been a trend over time that these gaps are pretty persistent. And then this is the math, our standardized scores in math over time. And they really tell a very similar story to our ELA scores. So you can see here that the equity gaps do become a little bit more apparent. If you look at our students with disabilities from 2015 to 2019, those proficiency scores have increased, but you can see that they're still not nearly where they need to be. Whereas in 2019, less than 40% of our students were proficient in math. And this was taken as an overall score for the district. And so with regard to CASC, we have students in grades 3 through 8, in addition to grade 11, take this assessment. And then we grabbed this data from our the California dashboard, which is sponsored by the California Department of Education. And it focuses on college and career readiness. And so there's several different indicators of how a student could become considered college and career ready. One of which is they meet all the A to G requirements by the time that they graduate. And so once again, seeing a trend, unfortunately, you can see the disparities amongst the groups. So there was only 41% of our English language learners who graduated college and career ready per the state's guidelines. We have 40% of our Black students. And again, that's compared to the upper end, 91% of our Asian students, 72% of our white students. And then again, 11% of our students with disabilities graduated college and career ready. So again, the gaps persist. And then moving away from the academics and a little bit more to the behavior, although we know our behavior, social, emotional, academics, it's like a Venn diagram. We know how interactive these things are and how much intersection there is between them. This slide indicates the percentage of students who have been suspended at least once, and we just took 1 year, 2019. And you can see here that now we don't have a large homeless population, but we do have homeless students in our district K-12. And even though we don't have a large homeless population, we still obviously value the experiences of each and every one of those students in that subgroup. And as you can see here, 20%, or of course, 1 in 5 of our homeless students were suspended at least one time in 2019. That's followed by our Black students, and then our foster youth, students with disabilities, and then you can see so on and so forth with the graph. And this is another piece that we wanted to share with you, and it's the significant disproportionality, which I'm going to abbreviate to SIGDIS for Linda Raleigh Tom. And we have been found essentially as a district to have a disproportionate representation of students with disabilities. So what do we mean by that? We have, as a system, over-identified Black students as being other health impaired or OHI. So Black students, as you saw in their presentation, were 1.7% of our overall SRVUSD population, but they actually represent 3.6% of our special education population K-12. And so this will also be a big part of our strategic plan, especially with regard to, how we're supporting all students, especially before they get to the stage where they would be identified as special education. And so now moving on from the data. And so again, I wanted to just share with you some voices from our students and from our parents with regard to equity issues in SRVUSD. And so at the board meeting where we talked about the equity petition that is out in the community, several people spoke. And we felt that some of them we really wanted to highlight here today, and that they were just really especially powerful. And I will read them. So the first one is parent, and she said, it is a pervasive understanding that difference was bad, and that preserving outdated cultural values and norms were more important than a safe environment for all students. They, and she was referring to her children, were not emotionally safe at school. Second one, While I'm grateful for the abundance of educational opportunities that I've had here, I've had several moments where I felt I did not belong as a young Black girl. And then finally, teacher Allison Gardner, how do we begin for each other? How do we begin to see each other? We need to make changes that will clearly demonstrate all our families belong in the district, that our children belong in our schools. Now, this was another quote from a high school student who said, whenever my PE teacher would break us into groups of boys and girls, it was like, where do I go? I'm not listed here. Another high school student, we're reading To Kill a Mockingbird in my English class. All of the students kept saying the N word. The teacher didn't say anything about the history of the word, why it was so harmful, nothing. She just let kids read it out loud over and over and over. After reading that book, my classmates started using the word regularly. It was so painful to listen to as the only Black student in class. Then the last of this, and I apologize if this is the second time you're seeing it, but when we've just spoken to so many people as we've developed this presentation, and they keep referring back to this video that was of a student, Isaiah Robinson, Monte Vista student, former Monte Vista student, after some racial incidents had occurred at Monte Vista. So the video's, I think, about 6 minutes, so please bear with us here, but we feel it's really, really powerful for people to see.
Good morning, family. Good morning, family. I'm happy to be here today. Mr. Todd, Mr. Clark, Mr. Brooks, and everyone for the opportunity to speak. So I want to ask you guys a question first. By raising hands, do not say, but who here knows my name? Do not say. Okay, keep it down for me. We'll go with you. What's your name?
I'm Hallie.
Hi, Allie. What's my name?
Isaiah.
You're Allie. I'm Isaiah. Nice to meet you. Sophomores, let's see. Let's go with you. Hi, what's your name?
I'm Sophia.
Hi, Sophia. What's my name?
You're Isaiah Robinson.
I'm Isaiah Robinson. You're Sophia. I'm Isaiah. Nice to meet you. Let's go, juniors. What's your name?
My name is Kyle.
Hi, Kyle. What's my name?
Your name is Isaiah.
My name is Isaiah. You're Kyle. I'm Isaiah. Stay with me. One more seniors. Let's see what we got. We'll go with. Please. What's your name? I'm Maddie. What's my name? Isaiah. Okay, come on. Can I get a round of applause for it, please? Now, we can all agree that my name is Isaiah. So, why do some of you feel entitled to call me out by my name? Every time one person calls me the N-word, whether it's ER or A, whether someone calls me a monkey, calls me a slave, I go from being human to not human at all. I go from being my own person to someone's property. That word, the N-word, that word was used thousands of years ago. I'm sure some of you know the history, but I'll refresh it for those who don't. My people were brought from Africa, right? You were put in chains and brought all the way, not here, but to America. against our will. And when we got here, it wasn't a warm welcome. Instead of hugs and handshakes and food, we went down on our knees, started picking cotton. Instead of pats on the back, we got whips on our back. So by one person calling me the N-word, you're taking me back thousands of years. And not just me. Every single person in this room. Every single one. See, those people that owned us were white. So if a white person calls me the N-word, you know what you do? You set yourself back thousands of years. You bring back an idea that was not okay. You let your community, the Monte Vista, the Danville community, look like one that no one wants to see. If I may, I'd like to tell you my story. My name is Isaiah Robinson. I was born in Everett, Washington, a town right outside of Seattle. See, Everett is a lot different than here. People had to walk different. They talked different. They acted different. You see, we had to hold our backpacks a little tighter. In Everett, our biggest fear wasn't being bullied. It was not making it to tomorrow. So my family, we worked hard and we got out of there. We left and never looked back. When I moved to San Ramon in 8th grade, it was wonderful. It was a paradise because I no longer had to fear. I didn't have to go in the wrong neighborhood and watch my back. I was safe. Even when I moved to Danville, it was so nice. Everyone was welcoming and open arms. There was no bullying, no racism, no labels. To the second month. There are some moments in people's lives you will never forget. For me, that was when I was called the N-word for the first time. Second month at Monte Vista. I had 4 friends. Barely anyone in my corner. I was walking from one class to the next with a kid I didn't even know. He said, "You need to get out of here, you N-word." Think about that. A new area, I didn't know the kid. But because my skin was a shade darker, because something I didn't get to choose my genetics, that kid said, "I don't like him. He is not my friend. He is not human." Barack Obama once said, "Change will not come at a certain time with a certain people at a certain place. It comes when we decide we are the change we seek." So stop letting our differences divide us. Some people have short hair, some people have long hair. Some people play the trumpet, some people play the violin, some people play the drums. Some people dance, some people sing. Some people can shoot a basketball, while others can write poems. These differences are what unite us. So, despite our differences, let's just remember this. If there's one thing you can get from the day, it's this. Despite our differences, we are all the same. Despite our differences, we're all Monte Vista Mustangs. It doesn't matter how we got here, what our story is, we are here now. We can choose how this campus is looked at forever. But we will not accomplish our goal of changing if we do not understand we are all equal. Despite our differences, we are the same. And the day we understand that is the day we're truly ready to change. My name is Isaiah Robinson. I hope you enjoyed this rally.
So we threw a lot of data out there, some of which was, which we always think is helpful, but a lot of which was really, qualitative, anecdotal, hearing the voices of our students, our kids, our parents, our teachers on what they need. So at that point, I'm going to stop here and I will quit sharing. Okay. And just want to ask you what in this data, the quantitative or qualitative, really resonated with you about our students?
Nobody?
So I think that last video was very powerful, and some of this is very painful to watch, but it's what we need to see in order to be able to move forward. I think we're trying to create a culture where our students feel safe, where they're respected, and everyone is included. And one of the things that struck me about that video was we had a program that came into our high schools called No Place for Hate. And we also worked on this in the Cultural Responsiveness Committee doing these exercises. It's getting down to making this personal. And what I mean by that is when people come together and understand and find out about somebody else's story, one-on-one or even in a larger group, it changes the whole dynamic of what happens. Because with the advent of social media and our kids being on social media on their phones, it's so much easier. And we've also experienced this as board members, at least I have, that people sitting at home in front of a computer or on a phone, it's much different and much more impersonal and much easier to spew whatever it is that's on your mind versus if we were one-on-one together. So as we create our going forward, our game plan as far as how we're going to affect change, I think making it personal, meaning people coming together, our students coming together to hear stories like what he presented, which was so amazingly powerful. And we've done some of that, but it's felt like it's more of a hit and miss, trying to do different things at different times. But if we can come up with something more cohesive that works as a system in an ongoing basis, to be able to bring our students and our staff together to know, because when I know who someone else is and they know who I am, it changes the dynamic of what happens between us. And it's a very powerful thing. So I hope we can incorporate that into what we're doing.
Ken?
Yeah, I'll just add, from the data points themselves, as a community, we pride ourselves as being, somewhere at the top, in terms of graduation rates and test outcomes and things like that. But that's when we're looking at the aggregate. And I think the point of what we're trying to get to is, work that we've been doing over the years with personalized learning plans, for instance, where we really start looking more at all students, but also each individual student. And when we start looking to each individual students, that's where we find those differences that don't always add up to being the best. What's great for most doesn't necessarily translate to what's best for all. And I think that that's where there's the opportunity for us to continue, but the importance also of looking at that data and being real about the data. It's a great feeling for us in a community to be able to say, what a large percentage of our kids graduate, what a large percent of our kids, are at school every day even, because it's so different than so many other communities. But it's when you pull apart the data and you see that there are holes and that there are individuals involved and lives involved, and we need to do a better job of focusing on those as well. And that's where we'll know when we're doing better, when we just look at, well, we've gone from 97.1 to 97.3, but we've actually made difference in individuals' lives in the process.
Laura?
I think that one thing that maybe we can do when we look at the data is to look at that information as opportunities to find out a little bit more about the general reasons why specific diverse groups have, whether it's a higher burden, a higher need, whatever it is. And then as we're building this strategic plan and this new systems, that we're putting in place to create equity, that we're making sure that we're including the details of the issues that individuals and diverse groups have, not necessarily in the wording of the systems, but making sure that there is a place for those, and we're not losing sight of specific issues that specific marginalized groups have, that we're making sure that as we're looking at the whole picture, that we're including those details in that, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's making sense, but and then another piece that I just kind of want to, I don't know if we're there yet in the conversation, but just really making sure that there is a system for accountability as well. I think that from my experience, I guess, and I don't want to just bring it to my experience, because I think that in listening to that former student story as well, that there's a because sometimes there isn't the accountability, there becomes a black hole of misguided actions that happen, and a lack of understanding of what the consequence of that is for other people. And so when we build an accountability into the system, that creates more opportunity for learning and for a better understanding and empathetic way of looking at the choices that I'm making when I use my words about someone else, that type of thing. So just kind of putting that out there. I know it's maybe down the line in the conversation, but.
Anyone else? I think both, for me, both the quantitative and the qualitative, and of course, the emotional impact, right, of the last video, the student Isaiah's video. I mean, really hit me, like I'm sure, of course, the video, Isaiah, it's about his experience and the Black student experience, but I'm sure looking at the quantitative data also, there are lots of stories about challenges with our other groups of students, right? Special education students who are, not doing well with the graduation rates, or the suspension and behavior. So I think when we look at data, right, we have to probably kind of use both to look a little bit more deeply at what those challenges are, so that we can somehow resolve, or if not eliminate, mitigate some of these challenges. Because it's always, I mean, I have not been on a board for that long, but I know that when we look at the gap, right, the achievement gap and all, it's similar groups, it's the same groups that comes up, and we've tried different things, and it's always, there's still a gap. So perhaps the way we look at the data may help us, right, going forward. Shelley?
Another thing that struck me about that video that he talked about, and we have to look at we have to look at our community and see who they are, because when he was talking about moving here and how it was so nice because there wasn't going to be any racism, and there wasn't a bad part of town that you had to worry about going to. I think we like to pride ourselves as a community as being very open and being very socially advanced in a lot of ways. But I think what he spoke to in that video is the unconscious bias that we have going on, that people don't even really realize, but it's harder to deal with because in some ways it's more covert than if you're dealing with outright, bad neighborhoods or drugs or things going on in the streets or whatever. We don't have any of that. We look good when it comes to that, which is great. I mean, it speaks a lot about the kind of community we live in. But I think it gets a little bit more difficult to deal with these issues when it's more of an unconscious bias that maybe people don't realize that they have, or it's coming out in different ways. And so I think we have to keep that in mind as we decide how we're going to actually execute and bring some of these systems into our school system to educate our community as well as our kids. Because it doesn't look like we would have that here, but we have it here. And our students are experiencing it and they're suffering from it. And it's up to us as the leaders in the community, even if it's not popular with all of our demographic, to make sure that we provide the education and everything that we can to make sure that all of our students feel safe, supported, are seen, and are wanting to be on campus because it's the best place for them. So thank you.
Rachel.
Shelley used an important, she framed it when in her first remarks about stories and the importance of stories. And I think we can do a lot in terms of how students treat each other and how staff and students interact with each other by building on the concept of empathy. But we have to go beyond that because we need to fix our systems. I think the things that were said to Isaiah as a student at month 2 go way beyond unconscious bias. I mean, it's just outrageous in my mind that anyone would say that to him. And I think it shows that there's an undercurrent that we tend to not see and we like to ignore because it's very unpleasant. But we have to confront that. We can't have a school system that makes that, and I'm not saying our schools make it okay, but we somehow don't deal with confronting it, dealing with making a student that is hurt in that way feel whole, whether it's restorative justice or what other options there are. But we need to be building those kind of things into our systems. And then the other thing is, while we want to look at each student individually, I don't think our capacity as a school district with the funding that we have can address every low achieving student individually. I mean, we would like to, but we've also got to get better at meeting their needs. And I know we'll get more into that in the other pillars, but there's a lot to learn from the research about education about that. And I know we're doing some great work there, but we want to be individually focused, but we have to have a system that can address it. I mean, there'll always be the need for some individualization, but when we're talking about the gaps that are in the 20 to 40 to 60% of a student population, that's a system problem too, not just an individual student.
Can I say one last thing? I just want to piggyback on what Shelley was saying about the fact that sometimes we don't really see the marginalization that happens in our community. We also don't see the students who are being marginalized. I think there's this sense of, well, we don't have homeless in San Ramon and Danville. We don't have, whatever it is, right? And so part of the issue, from what I see, is that there isn't that space for someone who needs help, who's disadvantaged, that like housing insecure or food insecure, to be able to come into the light and say, I need help. So providing, we have the resources in our district, and again, I go to my own experience when my niece stayed with me and she was considered an unaccompanied minor. And so I saw at Iron Horse how the staff and the teachers and the administration, just the support, Dia Mundell, various people just wrapped their arms around her. And I was stunned, like I didn't realize that existed. And so making sure that we really provide the pathway to get those resources for those students that need it, so that they can get, so that they can step out into the light and say, and maybe they don't have to, announce themselves, but be able to know where to get the help, right?
Mhm.
And I think that there's that disconnect, there's that fear and shame on all sides around the implicit bias that I have. There's the fear and shame, and then there's the fear and shame on the person who's experiencing that, and how they're feeling silenced by that. So how do we create that safe space for everyone to be able to be brave and to step out and say, I need help, or I need help, that kind of thing. So.
Anyone else? Okay. We can move forward.
Okay, well, I'm going to put my screen back up, but now I'm going to turn it over to Director of Secondary, John Campopiano.
Thanks, Dr. Pettish. Hi, everyone. John Campopiano, and I am just sitting here so excited and to hear this conversation. Thank you, Dr. Moy. Thank you, trustees. Thank you to our district leadership that has worked together to do this, our Director of Equity, Ash Gutierrez, all of our site educators, staff, and to Isaiah, Tana, Risha, all of our students that have been giving us your heart and your soul. We're doing this because and for you. So thank you. Isaiah was 10th grade. And if you've ever worked at a school, which many people watching, when that bell rings, usually people go. And if you heard the 10th grader with a packed gym during Words Matter Week, the bell rang and they were there. So thank you again, Isaiah, for sharing your story with us. I'm going to jump into implications for future work. Many of you have already mentioned these. Next slide, Ms. Pettish. We're really going to, as Dr. Malloy mentioned, equity is a commitment to action. And he mentioned that early in our presentation. A focus on identifying and eliminating inequities by actively developing anti-bias policies, practice, and cultures system. Many of you just in your discussion were talking about the system need. And I'm glad that we are leaning in that, because we have had great intention, but our impact isn't where it needs to be. Next, please. So we're going to shift our ideology from a deficit ideology, a belief system that it's the individual that is the issue. And I'll give some examples in a minute. To a structural ideology, a belief that attributes disparities to inequitable access and opportunity. And I heard all of you say in one form or another, our system needs to change. And I'll give some examples of deficit ideology on the next slide, Ms. Pettish. So the idea of this first one, parents don't care about their children's education, using that as a mindset. Students with disabilities shouldn't be held to high standards. All right. Or those students came to us, so of course they're behind. And one that really gets me as a teacher and an educator, as a principal, some people simply refuse to take advantage of the opportunity presented to them. It's our moral imperative to ensure that students receive the support they need by name in a timely, guaranteed manner. And that's critical. We can't just say, oh, they didn't take it. No, we need to close that achievement gap, ensuring that it happens. Deb, next slide, please. Shifting from deficit to structural, a focus on how our system contributes to disparities. And that's hard because, as we've mentioned earlier, in this system, we've been doing incredible work. Trustees, your experiences, Ms. Hurd visiting each site last year and listening to our students. Our system is doing everything we can, but we are contributing to some of these disparities. Our goal, the moral imperative, is to eliminate all barriers and challenges within our system. So we need to identify them and eliminate them. Next slide. So some examples of that structural ideology. Are there policy practices which lead to disproportionate amounts of homeless and Black students being suspended? Are those policies in place that are creating this? Reforming inequitable grading practices across the system. We'll hear more about that in our upcoming workshops as well. Modification of facilities to accommodate students of all genders. and evaluation of policies and practices that lead to disproportionate outcomes for students with disabilities. And this is the one that really hit us. When we looked at that college and career data a few slides ago, we are graduating, but not prepared. And if you've been part of LCAP meetings in the past, you've heard me mention this before. We can and will get our students college and career ready. We just need to be intentional about removing and eliminating any barriers that exist. Next slide, please. So work we've been doing, we have 5 emerging themes. The first, we must diversify TK-12 curriculum. And we heard this from our students at each site we went to. Equity-focused professional development for all staff and curriculum for all students. Reforming our responses to racist and discriminatory incidents. Recruiting, onboarding, and retaining staff of color. And review of system-wide policies, practices, and procedures. I'll give a few examples of each of those as we proceed. Next slide, please. So within our TK-12 curriculum, we must conduct a system-wide equity audit to provide insight into any patterns that are creating a situation where underserved students are not having access to succeed. Provide professional development resources and other forms of support to address the curriculum inequities uncovered by such audit. Next slide, please. This one I'm going to take a bit more time on, equity-based professional development and curriculum. I heard this mention our trustees as just, hey, opting in. No, we have a proposal where our professional development is mandatory. So the first one, provide mandatory professional development for all staff on history of bias and racism and its impact. Provide mandatory anti-racist training for all staff, any individual on a campus, anyone employed by our district. Provide mandatory training to all staff on gender inclusive language and practices. Those are so critical for us moving forward that each member and our students know that. Now, if you look at the system-wide, if you go to the right, equity-based curriculum policies and practices, ensure that the curriculum is inclusive and affirming for all students, regardless of race, sexual orientation, gender, disability, socioeconomic status. It is our duty to ensure that is the case. Next slide, please. Reform our responses to racist and discriminatory incidents. I have been incredibly impressed with how we, as a site, respond when there's acts of hatred. However, one of the things that we have found as a theme is that we must provide detailed and timely communication to our school communities focused on repairing harm done when racist or biased incidents occurs, and the steps that we're going to take as a site to prevent these in the future. Because what we found is that if we aren't properly communicating what happened, it starts to spread, and that misinformation leads to more harm and more pain. Develop and implement consistent and effective responses to the full range of racist or biased incidents that exist on and off our campuses. And I'm proud of the work that our equity leadership team, led by Dr. Pettis and Ms. Gutierrez, have put together a manual to help our sites prepare and respond in a clear and consistent way, which we will be sharing as we move forward. Next slide, please. A review of system-wide policies, procedures, and practices. So we need to end all current facilities to ensure equitable access and opportunity. Examine our discipline policies and develop effective alternatives to suspension. One example of the work that we took middle of last year that will continue once we're back inside is our Director of Student Services, Ken Nelson, went to each site, small group, met with the administrators and the counselors to look at their discipline practices and policies and begin that work developing alternatives so that we can have restorative mindset when we're working with students when they make mistakes. Next slide, please. And finally, recruiting, onboarding, and retaining staff of color. We're going to examine the current strategies used for recruiting, hiring, retaining, adopt best practices, commit to hiring a more diverse staff that better reflects the demographics of our district. The next slide will show you, and provide training and ongoing support to retain existing staff from underrepresented groups. Ms. Pettis will proceed to the next slide, that our staffing demographics are quite different than the student enrollment demographics that you saw earlier in our slides. Thank you. Next slide, Ms. Pettish. And so as I transition back to Malloy, I just want to take one last plug to thank all of the amazing educators K-12. You've been doing this work, and thank you. We have more to do, and I'm excited about ensuring that each student by name, by need, gets what they need to be successful. Thank you, Dr. Pettish. Dr. Malloy, back over to you. You're on mute, Dr. Malloy.
You'd think after all this time, I would know how to click that button. Thank you so much, John, for your insights. Thank you, Debbie, for the perspectives you provided. And I also want to echo to our trustees that this is really, I believe, one of the most important conversations we can be having as we start this part of the process. And we're thankful to our entire community for engaging with us, all of our stakeholders in this process. In the time that we have remaining, we'd like to turn this over to you. And we will wish to take as many notes about your insights, perspectives, and directions. If we can go to the next slide. So basically, we've already stopped at each interval for you to provide some insight. So this is kind of an opportunity, if anything has struck you that you haven't already been able to share related to what has resonated with you, what questions might you still have, what goals do you envision as you think about it. But again, as I said earlier, it's more to get to invite you to consider some of the things you've heard without getting too much into the particulars, because obviously that will happen later. Is there anything else that you didn't have a chance to share that you wanted to? So that's kind of like the first piece. But if I could just go to the next slide, because we can pull this all together. This is what we really would need from you today. It's the slide I shared at the beginning. What other information should we consider before embarking on the strategic planning process? What do you want to learn from our stakeholders? What do you believe we need to know more about? So that when we bring back to you the information that has been shared, because we will ask all of the questions you would probably expect. What has your experience been in this area? What insights would you like to provide? What suggestions for change might you have? And we will certainly focus all of those types of questions. But maybe there are some specific requests for that you have. So President Ordway, I'm going to stop there. Again, the questions on the previous slide, if we want to go back there for a minute, Debbie, are the general ones we've been talking about. And if there's anything further you'd like to add, but why don't I leave the second slide? Well, actually, we can take the slides off so we can see each other. And at least I think you understand the questions and reflections you're looking for. And as I said, we will take notes so that we have these insights as we plan the next step.
Before I ask for board members, I just have a question, and I know that this will come probably. I don't want to like really dive into like details and stuff like that. But with regards to, retaining and hiring maybe more staff, right? That would be more of a reflection of our student demographics. I would assume that we're looking into then our human resources practices, our hiring, like maybe the applications and things like that with regards to hiring, right?
Thank you for that question. And I'll say that sometimes in my experience, the danger that can happen when doing this important equity work is it falls only to those who hold a title or an expertise, like Ashley has. But it's all of us. We need the expertise that Ashley and others have, but it's all of us. So to answer your question, yes, every one of our departments will also be creating their own improvement goals aligned with whatever the system direction is, not just the schools. So human resources would most definitely have to be a part of it in the way you just described.
Any questions or comments or board members. Laura.
I just, to follow up with Susanna, with the tenet of hiring more staff of color, I would also push you to hire just more diverse staff. It's not just about race, to look at trying to develop opportunities for, whether it's LGBT community, adults with disabilities. I think the more diverse staffing that we have, the more opportunity, I know I keep using that word, but for our community to see people that are different than them, and to get to know people that are different than them, and to get to see that these are gifts, and this is not something to be afraid of, and those types of things. So using that directive as an opportunity to look beyond just color at the diverse community. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there.
Trustee Brett, thank you for that. To be frank, twice before this presentation in cabinet that out, we just couldn't change it because there were too many difficulties. So I'm just going to put it out there to say we moved it in our thinking to a staff that represents our community. Right. And so that the diversity of our community is experienced. So I thank you for naming it, because we did actually have that discussion just literally 20 minutes before we started.
Minds that think alike. And then one thing that I don't know that we really touched on, but, and this might be, I don't know, maybe a little esoteric, but equity and communication. I think that if there's a way to also look at how we are I guess I've already talked about this a little bit, but how we're allowing a safe space for everyone to be able to communicate and to be able to not just speak their truth, but to be able to be a part of the conversation. So when we're talking about engaging our stakeholders, that's looking at the equity and communication with that. So, how are we creating a space for people to be truly and to be truly empowered and engaged, and not just in that performative way. And I know that that's what we're talking about, but just to kind of put that out there again and make sure that, again, communication, equity within communication is a part of the equation. And then in terms of what I would want to learn from stakeholders would be, basic questions like what do they need? What will empower that individual? Using one way to look at it is a way to generate ideas and to just allow that group to brainstorm, and so that then we can kind of see where the needs are. So, which I'm sure you're already on top of, but. So, and also the accountability, I keep going back to that accountability aspect, but really speaking with stakeholders about where they see the gaps are with that in their experience, because that's who's really affected by by whether it's restorative justice or more disciplinary, extreme type of accountability actions and stuff. So.
Anyone else? Shelley?
One of the things that got touched on a little bit was how parents, how the community, how they get access to help. And I'll just use, when they have issues or when things come up, where do they go? Who do they talk to? Do they start at the district level? If it's a school issue, the principle is logical, but that isn't always the most appropriate place. And so I hope that we can find a way to empower our community and give them some better tools as to how they access the help that they need. I'll use it as an example, special education, because that's what I'm familiar with. My son was a special education student from the time he was in first grade, and he graduated college ready. And I will say that, just as an aside, that I credit the services, the consistent services and support that he got through the school district, making him the student that he is today, a junior in college. So I'm very grateful for that. But I was able to and knew Initially, I didn't, but I got educated very quickly, actually through an outside source, of what services were available to him through the school district. And it took that plus the support at home and many tutors to get him where he is today. But when parents have issues like this and don't know where to go, it gets very frustrating very fast sometimes. So when I was at San Ramon Valley High School, I worked on a thing called the Problem Solving Matrix. And what it is a document that we created for parents at the school site. And when they had specific issues, they could go to the matrix and say, identify what their issue was. And then it gave them a step-by-step process to go through. And starting with, a lot of times it started with the teacher, or maybe it started with a special ed person, or if their child was in special ed, that help them navigate so that we're not, of course we want to help everybody, but district staff is very busy doing all the things they need to do to run the district. And sometimes I think it would be good if we had a way for students, for parents to know, this is where you start. And if you don't get what you need, or if you have further questions, this is the next person you would go to. I think it would go a long way of maybe, it's certainly educating the parent community and getting rid of any confusion that there's out there about how you actually get help with different issues that go on for your child, because parents, as you know, rightfully so, get very passionate about the issues that affect their particular student. So I think we could look at that as we move forward.
Anyone else? Did I see Rachel? Did you have a hand? Yeah.
So one of the first things that didn't get to touch on in the beginning was that resonated was I really appreciated the differentiation of using the terminology underserved rather than at risk. I think it sounds pretty small, but I think it's a pretty important, just mind shift. And I think it also dovetails nicely with what Shelley was getting at. I would love to see that matrix, Shelley. That sounds amazing that it was actually, put in writing, especially having it not be special ed focused, having it, apply to everyone is a really, key point. Kind of wish we'd had that all this year. Related to engaging the community and what we'd like to hear from them, I think we want to ask them, does your family feel comfortable on your school sites? Welcome, however you want to phrase it, to be gauging that, baseline. I also think it might be relevant to ask them where they feel they are in the concepts of cultural competency, anti-racism, unconscious bias. So, because I really liked the comments Laura made early on in the workshop about we're an educational entity, and as we do this work, maybe the community can look inward, look at their home life too. Not to say we're, pushing an agenda on everyone, but the fact that a student would say, I'm going back to Isaiah's story, there's something more there going on if a student felt they needed to say that to Isaiah. And so it just seems like maybe we need to get a temperature on really where our families are on the whole topic of equity, not just the racial, cultural pieces, but all of this.
No, thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I agree with that. And also I wanted to, because it was kind of mentioned, but I know that Ashley has been working on, along with, I think, Debbie and John, but a manual, right? I mean, to actually respond, right? That, how do you respond to racist comments? Like what Isaiah, because I think we've, again, one of the quotes from what we heard from a past board meeting, right? Someone who spoke who said that this happened and I was called this, but no one responded, right? The teachers didn't, other students didn't. And I just kind of felt like, belittled, or paraphrasing on what the message was. So yeah, so I just want I would love to learn more about that manual, but I think that to learn about each of our stakeholders, learning where they are, but also us learning how to kind of help, respond to whether or not we are right. Because I see that if there's an incident of either racism or just marginalization or whatever it is, if we are a part of whatever incidents, we're either a victim, perpetrator, or bystander. And I think that any of those roles need to be to learn, right? We need to learn how to respond to an incident in whichever role. So that's what
President Ordway, just because I think we have a little bit of time, and I agree that we had to move quickly through it. Ashley, do you think you could just provide a little bit more insight to the response to hate and discrimination process that you, with John and others, led? Just because I think that that's an important example. We went through it quickly because we didn't know how time was going to work. I think we're in pretty good shape time-wise. So maybe you could just offer a few of the significant points so that our trustees, as well as anyone who might be watching, could have a sense of where we're going with that.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So what we have really tried to build is a tool that is very accessible and user-friendly for leaders. One of the things that we've talked a lot about is that when an incident of hate happens on a campus, it's quite emotionally activating, not just for the people who experienced it, but also for the administrators who are responding to it. And so having some sort of tool or resource that they've had extensive training about before the event even happens will help them kind of calm their nervous system and respond to the incident in the moment as well. So the resource includes communication plans, like at what point do you need to notify maybe a class where it happened, or the grade level involved, or the entire school, who should be contacted at the district office to collaborate on that communication, and what is kind of the sentiment that needs to be conveyed. It also has a list of action steps that should be taken that really lead with the student who was harmed. So what often happens when we're doing an investigation is we go straight to the perpetrator of the harm, we talk to their families, we think about their consequences, but we aren't doing enough to check in with the student who was harmed and their family to make sure that our steps are really meeting all of their needs. So this sort of flips that approach and says, lead with the student that was harmed, inform their family about what happened, and ask them what they need to feel like the harm has been repaired. And then the third category is consequences. So we want to make sure that students have appropriate consequences that match the severity of the action, but we also want to make sure that those consequences are paired with a learning opportunity. So we don't want to just suspend or expel and have no opportunity for a student to truly understand why the behavior was so problematic and the harm that it caused. So we've provided a whole host of sample consequences, but then also a sort of framework for how you could build a sample consequence for the type of event that we couldn't predict. And then the intention would be that we would have kind of an expertly trained person at each site, and that those folks would be partnered up so that if an event did happen at one school and the person thought, I really just need to gut check my response to this, or I need to check in with someone to see if they have a consequence already for an event like this that may have happened at their own site, that there's also this opportunity for collaboration and kind of cross-check and cross-accountability to make sure that each scenario is getting the kind of expert response that it deserves.
Thanks, Ashley.
Zara?
Yeah, Ken?
Yeah. First, Ashley, thank you very much for that. One of the things that really hit me was your discussion about support for victims. Last year, we had a couple of incidents, one in particular where myself and Greg Marvel sat down with the father of one young lady who had some problems in regard to racial tension. And his main point to us was that first, Yes, the family never heard anything about the consequences to the perpetrator, but also there was very little outreach in terms of support for the victim and meeting their needs going forward. So I think those type of things are really critical for us to be considering. In terms of the other things we've talked about, I've spoken a lot during the course of the workshop, so I'm not going to get into many of those, but a couple of things that resonated with me. First, the discussion of disciplinary practices and really making sure that, you know, as we move forward, and it relates right back to Ashley's comments, making sure that we have things that consequences that fit but are education based, but also don't remove the need for discipline as appropriate too. So someone doesn't feel like, well, we really don't care. You got to be able to find that balance where it says, yes, it's an educational opportunity, but there also are consequences for actions and learning about personal responsibility. The other thing had to do with the comments on diversity in employment. We've spoken about this as a board before, and it really comes down to our HR employment practices, because it's not, and this kind of thing we want to make clear to the community. At least in my mind, we are not talking about a quota system. We're not talking about looking at our demographics and absolutely matching up, you know, okay, we now need someone of this particular subgroup to be in our thing, so in our schools, so that we can check it off a box someplace. What I believe we're talking about is that we not only welcome diversity in our employment, but we actually embrace it. We want people to consider this a safe place for them to teach and to participate as staff members, and that we welcome everyone to apply, and that for those who might worry about some type of quota system being put in place, we are looking for qualified, the best qualified people that we can find. But part of that is to make sure that we are opening the doors to everyone so that we can find those folks who are the best qualified that also meet some of these other qualifications that we would like to make sure are existing within our system. And that brings me to one other quick point, and it has to do with the process for community engagement. It kind of ties into it. I always look at, you know, these kind of processes from a change management perspective. To me, it's not enough for us just to seek input from folks. What we're really seeking is their buy-in and participation and acceptance. And so how we go and ask for people's participation, once again, it can't come off or even being sensed for a moment as being a checkoff. You know, okay, we know we have to get people to participate, so we'll set up a group and give people a chance to come in, and we'll then turn around and tell them everything we're already going to do and ask them to nod. We're not going to get much further if that's the case. I think we have to find ways like, you know, extended workshops to actually get people to participate and feel that their participation is meaningful, not just a checkoff. And I say those words, and I understand how difficult it is to get true buy-in from the community because they're going to come at us from different perspectives. And one thing I'd be very careful, and one thing I was very happy not to see in this presentation is a lot of what I'd refer to as academic-ese type of language. We have to be able to speak in layman's terms about what we're trying to accomplish and how the community fits into those processes in order for people to feel like they really are part of it. Because again, I think buy-in is going to be incredibly important if we want to really move forward and not just be able to say, yep, we did it. That's it.
Great, thanks, Ken.
I have one last little thought, sorry. One thing that I felt was wasn't really discussed that I just want to throw out there is the power dynamics and equity that's created in power dynamic. And so making sure that that's kind of just in your mind a part of the equation when you're talking with stakeholders, engaging with stakeholders, and building out plans and stuff. So.
And thank you for that, Trustee Brock, because one of the things that we are going to focus on, and as I said, we're kind of preparing the vehicle so you can understand it for next week at the board meeting. We'll inform that vehicle through the reflections that you've shared, but that will be the actual process itself. Part of the reason why we want to use different strategies is so that we can actually navigate the power dynamic. Because some strategies might be more problematic depending upon how someone finds themselves than others. And even though I know that, for example, some people like a town hall, but others don't, because sometimes at a town hall, there might be one perspective that takes over, and others who have a different insight may not find room to speak. So then we might also use something like a thought exchange differently than we've used them at a town hall just to help us generate questions. But there are so many other ways to use that particular tool in a way that creates different kind of space. But nothing takes place of where there are already authentic relationships. So the principal relationship is one, but the other idea that you helped us surface is one where we actually draw upon others in the community who have those relationships, because that's another way I've learned to get at that power dynamic and create the safe space to get the insight. So the goal is that we bring you, it's not going to be a very complex stakeholder engagement report. Like, I don't want to give you the impression that it's going to be pages of complexity, but what I do commit to with our team is that it has touch points and entry points for as many people as we can, preferably all. But that's kind of what we're working on right now. So thank you for that point.
Great. Any other questions or comments or?
So if there are none, we can go to our last slide before, obviously, President, if there are any public comments before we close, that will be up to you. But our last slide, and you don't have to, Deb, you don't have to go there. I'll just share the message because it's a repeat of what we started with at the beginning. So part 2 of this workshop will be March 11th. And what we intend to do there is to speak about what do we mean when we say deep learning and innovation? What does it mean when we speak about well-being? Obviously, when we say deep learning and innovation, we're also talking about instruction and grading and all kinds of, and literacy and all the important pieces that we've been doing, multi-tier support systems. I don't want to use educational language. Trustee Mintz, thanks for reminding us of that. We'll be talking about all of those things on March 11th. Of course, well-being, social emotional learning is also March 11th. The other piece that we're going to close with on March 11th is that even though you've heard us speak about leadership throughout, we define leadership as in the experience and expertise we all bring. So that's shared leadership model. And then within that, some of us hold a formal leadership position, which is not about doing everything, but certainly ensuring that the conditions are created, and how we develop leadership in order to support these strategic directions will be how we'll close out some insights and ideas on the March 11th workshop. And then, of course, we move into stakeholder engagement, as we suggested, March and April. May, you will be able to hear from us all the feedback we received. We'll try to put it into some themes that will allow it to be easier to understand. Certainly we'll make accessible the raw information to the best of our ability, still honoring people's identities and where required. And then June, there's 2 board meetings. Our goal will be to provide first draft for your discussion and then second draft. So the May meeting is important because that's where you really need your thinking based upon what you heard. So please don't forget about, and please consider, and we really think it's important that, and what we'll do then between that May board meeting and the June meeting is we'll try to figure out what should go into commitment statements and what might be more a part of actions that you'll see later. And we'll bring all of that back to you in June 2 times. So that is basically the plan. We thank you for your engagement and for your questions and for your insights and for your perspectives. The team, if I can speak for us, we've been in the important work of reopening our schools, that hard and difficult and challenging work, and that's still going on. And we'll talk about that certainly in the days to come, tomorrow. But what we are excited about sincerely is that while we are doing that important work, this important work has continued and needs to be focused and continue forward. And so it's this momentum that we're also really interested in bringing to our community in a way that inspires their contribution in ways that your leadership has provided our staff today. So I'm really, really grateful on behalf of our team for everything that you have been able to share with us through these last couple of hours. So President Ordway, back to you.
Okay. Just wanted to check with, I guess, Logan, do we have anyone for public comment?
There are no hands raised right now for public comment. If anyone would like to make a comment, please raise your hand. Otherwise, there are none.
Okay, thank you. Then, want to thank you, Dr. Malloy and the district team on bringing us this workshop and your presentations and giving us, the information and some of the data that you gathered for us as we go forward. And this is absolutely the work that we are here to do. And because, again, this is the opportunity where we are really able to set the direction, and because we need to know, right, as where we want to go as a school district. We want to set our goals because we still want to be, a top performing, not only top performing, but top supporting school districts for all of our students with all their differences. And in order to do that, we need this work. And of course, we welcome all of our stakeholders' input, feedback, questions. It is, again, we are building something for our students, and we want to know that what we are building is going to serve all of our students well. So we do very much welcome all the stakeholders' feedback. So thank you again. And if nothing else, I think we're going to adjourn for this workshop. Board, I will see you tomorrow for our another meeting.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey, bye.